These are the texts that congregations that utilize the common lectionary will be applying in one way or another on the third Sunday of Advent, which will be December the 17th. The first comes from the book of Isaiah, the 61st chapter. It's a divided text. Our lectionary reading is 1 to 4 and 8 to 11. There are probably three speakers in this one. I think there were three speakers in the text last week as well. The section that's being skipped is mostly the second speaker, although the third section has a speaker too. But what you'll notice about the first few verses is that these are the very same verses that Jesus read in Nazareth. And after he read the scroll, he rolled the scrolls up, the book of Luke tells us, after he read this aloud in the synagogue, and there's a moment of quiet, and then he speaks to it and says, these words have been fulfilled today in your hearing. And the short result was people wondered, well, wait a minute, isn't this Mary's boy? And then the longer result was they took him out and rushed him to the edge of the town and wanted to push him off a cliff. So they saw in this a sense of blasphemy in Jesus' day, even though these words are there about someone who has the Spirit of the Lord that is calling them to right wrongs and to change the way of the world. And when you read the text, you'll see all of these things. Bring good news to the oppressed, release those from prison, and on and on and on about that. Then the last section of this Isaiah text for today is, well, after a word that seems like it's from the middle speaker, then it's, although it says I, it almost suggests that it's not a response of one person, but the response of sort of a corporate I. It's really hard to tell, but it stays within the same vein of things being renewed, things being changed and transformed, and a time of joy and laughter. The potency of a text like this is that it often arises when there is a time of no joy and no laughter, and yet there is this confident expectation in the work of God that is already being accomplished, even when it's unseen. That is a guideline for those of us in the faith to remember that, even on our worst days or in the world's worst days, that by faith we know that God is somehow already at work, and we're invited to live into that with a sense of joy. Now, that kind of a theme is going to go through our entire group of readings for today. The second one, and I'm going to not spend a lot of time on it because I'm going to do we're looking at 5 readings today. The second one is Psalm 126, and I'm going to spend just a teeny amount of time here, but the thing I want to bring up here that I think helps to capture this theme of even when we don't see the Lord at work, by faith, we have confidence which energizes us to continue to live in joy and live into our faith by participating in what God has declared that God will do. In 126, there are several modestly different interpretations of verse 1, translations, of verse 1. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. I encourage you to look at several different translations just to see the differences in how those Hebrew words are interpreted. But one thing that I think holds our theme together, I was looking through several different translations after reviewing the Hebrew, and I went back to my Geneva Bible of 1560, a very early English translation, by the way. It certainly predates King James. And in the side of the 1560 edition of the Geneva Bible are comments on the text. And there is a comment on this first verse of 126. And I'm not looking at it right off, but I'll paraphrase it. The essence of it, well, this is pretty close to literal, but not quite. The essence of it is, in commenting on that verse, it says, by their incredible deliverance, referring to the people of Israel, the Lord has taken away every excuse of ingratitude. What I like about that is that that means that if God is already at work, and we can look at moments in human history where God has clearly, visibly, physically, as well as spiritually been at work, then that takes away every excuse of ingratitude even for us. But more than that, I think when people are ungrateful, they're less energetic. And what we see with joy is the opposite. So the Psalm speaks of joy. The Isaiah text speaks of one who works in behalf of all of the downtrodden. So that leads to a sense of joy as well. And we're going to see that as well in the gospel text when we move over to it here in a few minutes. The epistle text is the end of the book of 1 Thessalonians. You know, we call them books, but they're really just letters. And it's Paul speaking to the church in Thessalonica. Again, this is a church that is baffled that the end has not yet come. And so he spent part of his letter talking about how the end has not yet come and what we're supposed to do in those times. And today's text in chapter 5, beginning in verse 16, tells us about those things. And it begins, rejoice always. Rejoice always. It's about reinvigorating. It's about continuing to live in the expectation of what God has already been at work accomplishing. So that when people are looking toward a second coming, it's possible that they would sit patiently and do nothing. And Paul says that is not the role of the Christian community, to sit patiently and do nothing. Patience, yes, but enjoy living and doing the things that we feel led by the Spirit to be about. And that's what the entire text here is encouraging us in 1 Thessalonians, is to keep on keeping on with that kind of trust that we are living into the not just the future, but into the present that God is unfolding. And now the text that really some churches will use in place of the psalm. This will be the fourth text. It's not our gospel reading for today. It is what we call the Magnificat. It is Mary's song after she has learned that she is going to have a baby, and she goes to see Elizabeth, and when Elizabeth declares that the baby in her own womb has leapt or jumped or bumped or kicked, and Elizabeth declares to Mary what Mary has heard from the angel, that there's something special afoot with the baby she's going to have. Then Mary bursts into song, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's in Luke, beginning in the 46th verse of the first chapter, begins, "My soul magnifies the Lord." And there's this really upbeat psalm, actually, that Mary bursts into. Now, what is key to me about this is twofold. We have several women in the biblical text prior to Mary who have been older and who have been barren, and they have been blessed with a child. We've got Sarah with Abraham. We have Hannah, who gives birth to Samuel. We have Elizabeth, who's going to give birth to John. Now, all of these are older women who've never had children, keeping in mind, of course, that a woman's barrenness had been viewed as a sign of disgrace, and a woman's value was often seen, not properly, but was often seen in the number of children she could bear. And so these barren women were blessed with a child. Now, what we see in this instance is not a barren older woman, but a young unmarried girl, a young virgin. And so what we're to see with this call of the angel to Mary is radically different from how God has blessed these older three women through the biblical text. And those who were up on their scriptures would have seen and noticed the difference. That this means that God is afoot doing a new thing, in process of doing a new thing. Now keep this in process of doing a new thing with how Mary's psalm is spun out. And what we see are things that are done in the present perfect tense as it's translated for us in the English. The Mighty One has done great things for me. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy. All of these things in the past tense. So hold together, God is doing a new thing, which is what we see with Mary in her youth and in this decree that she is to have a child in a miraculous way, with what Mary is celebrating, that God has already done marvelous things. Now that puts the human condition squarely in the middle of the things God has done and the things God is doing. And while we don't always see the things that God is doing, with the eyes of faith, we can look back on the things God has done, not just historically and biblically, but even when we look back into our own lives at these moments in time where we now recognize that the finger of God's been upon us, or has nudged, or has created things for us that have brought us to the places where we are. One more text, and this is the official gospel reading for today. And I must tell you, when I was looking through this in preparation, I was terribly disappointed because a number of you know that while Genesis is my favorite book in the Bible, this text from John is probably my favorite text in the whole Bible, because I see this in John the writer, not John the baptizer, who the text is about today, but I see this in John the writer, his strong sense of how, in a real way, the culmination of all the creative activity of God, from the Big Bang to all of the variety of animals and creatures and planets and galaxies, that the culmination of that is the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we have beheld his glory. All of the creative power of the universe in the person of Christ. Now, that's not what the text is about today. It gives us a part of that. It gives us, well, it hints at it. It's John 1, but it jumps right in, and ignoring the part I just shared with you, it ignores that and jumps right in verse 6. There was a man sent from God named John. He was a witness called to testify to the light. What our writer John is trying to clearly define for us, which tells us something about the time and places in which John was writing, that John the Baptizer is not the light. John the Baptizer is not the Word made flesh, but is one who has been called to testify to the Word made flesh. And then we move on to see a little bit more about John's ministry when it skips from verses 6 through 8 to verse 19. And it mentions those who came from Jerusalem curious about John, those who came as messengers from the Pharisees to understand more. And they ask him, are you, Elijah or the Messiah? And John says, no. And they say, why are you baptizing? And his response is, well, I baptize you with water, but among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me, and I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal. Now, I hang on to the one who is among you whom you do not know. You see, it seems to me that is a hint again of the one who is among us, whom we don't always recognize. Christ at work, the living God, the one who has done things, the one who is doing things. And here we are, like Mary, like John the Baptizer, in between the has done and the is doing. And so we live in that presence of the ever active God who invites us to participate with joy, with energy, never to sit back in ingratitude doing nothing, but even in our worst moments, recognizing that he is among us and as he has done in the past, he is doing even now. And we're invited to be a part of that. I hope this is beneficial as you prepare during the Advent season for worship. And I'll look forward to seeing you again next week.